with strings attached. The bent wood of the dismantled half a guitar case swings gently with the flow of cold air through the building that once was a music shop. It appears as though it's dancing to the sounds of the video recording on the installation below. The guitar strings are barely noticeable at first, but as the piece moves, they catch the light, and the shadows make an interesting abstract line drawing on the wall behind. The installation piece is drawing our attention to society's preoccupation with relationships. In particular, the assumption, among many, that to be complete or whole, one has to be one half of a couple. The curvaceous line of the instantly recognisable guitar case, on the other hand, is showing the half in all its raw glory. It is consciously uncoupled, the newly coined phrase du jour in Hollywood. Like being single has to be defined or explained as a positive, conscious decision, rather than being perceived as something negative or a failure in societal terms. The piece shows the attractiveness of the lines and the shape of the half as a thing of beauty in its own right. It is suspended precariously by the handle of the guitar case to echo terms that are used to describe difficult relationships, like hanging in the balance, like hanging on a string, or trying to get a handle on it. The carcass of the guitar case is left in a raw state to highlight the raw, vulnerable state of ourselves as either single or one half of a societal couple. The shadows cast upon the velvet look of the newly plastered wall are deliberate and ever-changing. Whether we like it or not, we all come with strings attached, even the no strings attached relationships. Mostly these strings can be seen by the shadow that is cast when we shine a light upon them. In the desire to hide the tangled mass of strings, we can miss the full picture. But by shining the light, studying the shadows, we can know more about our true selves and share this truth. As the emotional artist with a sustainable arts practice, I like to voice the uncommon or the overlooked, particularly emotions, raw emotions. Curiosity and exploration lead us to unravel, pull apart, and examine deeply concepts and ideas that might otherwise be overlooked or considered universal and understood. Universal child. Universal child, earthling like other earthlings, wake up to this thought. Residue. A small amount of something that remains after the main part has gone, been taken, or used. The ink on the spoon in the sink made me think. I just don't have it, what others have. The ability to preserve the sacred space within. The self-possess that has been lost through the process of giving. The nebulous quality of making all happy that allows my boundaries to be infiltrated. I promise myself that this is the last time, doing others' will and not my own. But there it is, before I know. I'm in another's vision, their mission, fulfilling their passion. But where did mine go? Was I so weak and my want so small as not to withstand this subtlety of theft? It's in the language of the other's want that speaks directly to the heart of the giver, that makes my own wants superfluous. The ink on the spoon in the sink made me think. What's left when all the giving is given and all the taking is done?
Home. Memories, both good and bad, fill my heart with joy each time. Being away makes me appreciate everything even more. Home means more than a place to go back to. To meet people, those who don't discourage me from going for my own individual goals, those who love and care, and no distance or time changes it. They encourage me to try and risk more, to share and love more. Relationships with everyone may not always be harmonious. There will be bad times. But when they leave, we are reminded to be more loving, patient, and understanding. It teaches us true, unselfish love. Home is what makes me feel better when I am sad, and more confident when I doubt myself. It's what makes me feel loved, even if I have been alone for too long. I carry home with me. Always remember. Always remember. Sometimes the hardest part is to start, to let the words out when we are scared, or risk and change the course of our chosen way. To trust the process, not to overthink, but simply let experience in. Good or bad, there is no safe way to know. Stop leaving the gateway closed to changes and anyone who comes.
Boundaries. It's hard to deny that there is so much sadness and unhappiness all around us these days. Life has become so serious. I've pondered long and hard about this, and I've come to the conclusion that we are all afraid to laugh nowadays. We must be so politically correct in everything we say and do, or somebody somewhere will become offended. The laughter police are everywhere. All doom and gloom on the television, one murder, mystery, gruesome detective series after another. The alternative, listening to grumpy politicians shouting at one another. I haven't turned the TV on since the beginning of August. Instead, I've been watching old comedies on YouTube. Only Fools and Horses, Rising Damp, One Foot in the Grave, etc. Definitely none of them considered politically correct these days, but boy, am I having a good laugh. Envy and Wood. Envy, familiar to all, undeniable. Onerous to command, venom to be vanquished. Festering, growing, destroys. Akin to the rotting wood of the once strong oak, roots and bark strangled by ivy and weeds, extinguished by winter winds. Family gatherings. My mother's 90th birthday party. Everyone was cheerful and friendly, greeting one another with wide smiles and hugs. Mary, girlfriend of nephew Oliver, commented, "How wonderful. This would never happen with my family. We could never gather and sit around a table all together." "Wait," a voice in an ominous tone was heard in response. Nobody was quite sure from whom or from where. The evening passed by with copious amounts of alcohol consumed. I noticed my brother Paul was eating his dinner very quickly. I asked him why, wondering if he had to rush off somewhere. He responded, "I want to finish my dinner before the row starts." True to form, within minutes, Desmond stood up abruptly and shouted across the table at Richard, "What do you mean by that?" And then both brothers came together on the dance floor and started punching one another. My mother piped up with a broad smile on her face. "Look, how lovely, Desmond and Richard are dancing together." The rest of us fell about the place laughing. Two more brothers, there are 7 in all, quickly and strategically ushered the fighting pair out a side door of the function room, and my mother was none the wiser. I looked at Mary, my nephew's girlfriend, and said to her, "Most families are the same."
Borders and boundaries. I always knew, and yet didn't know, I was going somewhere, that I had somewhere to go. The feeling in my gut, while very young, was strong. At 10 I knew you were near. So near it turned out. That knowing within me got me through. It said I was okay, and that my heart was good too. Still, there were times when I felt obliged, or I owed something, or that I should be grateful for anything and everything. Like the heavy black bag of second-hand clothes, rags really, that I carried home that wet evening as a child. I still feel the cold hand and fingers while trying to drag that old bag home. Maybe I didn't deserve much. This feeling of not worthy stayed with me a while. It crept into my early adulthood. Even as a mother, I had to fight it. I knew where it come from. It was always there. Always there with me. I knew why, but I didn't know my name. Being adopted was the shame I carried. It was a label, a title that I kept to myself. It was never discussed at home, and I never asked. That lonely feeling of emptiness was allowed to live in me. I searched quietly for many years, with letters and calls, to find their names. I wanted this for me and my children. Where did I come from? And where did they go? Or do they know they have a daughter and 7 grandchildren? It was a crisp autumn day while walking the lane, that leafy lane, that lane of mine that I walked so many times before. The crunch of the autumn leaves on the foot and the freshness of the air created an awareness, a clarity. It spoke with firm confidence in a language I understood. You are why your life is what it is, I heard it say. From then on, I stopped and looked at me, all aspects of me. I looked at my inadequacies and my abilities. I could see now that I was creating my own boundaries. I allowed myself to be cut off or not worthy of living my life. I also realised that no one ever said I didn't deserve. It was me. When I stood and looked back to see how far I've come, knowing what I know now, I do deserve the very best that life can give. Now I can get out of my own way and willingly receive. If I had listened to back then, knowing what I knew, when I did know. What autumn means to me. Autumn always comes that wee bit early, earlier to mid-August for me. There's a feeling in my body that's hard to describe, like a sadness, a loneliness. Something is gone or it's going, and this experience generally stays for about 2 weeks. I feel it in the early morning dew or the late evening mist. It's not that I don't like autumn. On the contrary, I absolutely love it. I love the colours of the trees and the hedges, the red, the yellow and the rusty orange that fall over the wall. It's like every leaf and petal has put their best gear on for their farewell party. Autumn brings a quietness and a kind of hush in the garden, while the only sound is the crispy leaves underfoot, watching the birds gather in the garden, feeding together, with their squeaks and their squawks, fighting for their place in the feeding hut. Autumn reminds me of the cycle of life, the parallel process that's going on in all of us, inside and outside of us. The seasons, for example, spring, summer, autumn and winter. The toddler, the teen and the adult and the old. Everything has its time and place, but autumn shows us how.
My new journey is an old journey. I leave between 10 past and half past and I'm still in on time. It's hard to believe that this time 2 years ago I would need to get through the city traffic and be in to work by 10 past, and the door would get a knock before I even got my coat off. Now, I head on over the road at my leisure, the journey of my youth when Daddy would take us over to see the cattle. These days, I could meet some of our ones on the road and be able to stop for a chat and still be in on time. Over the Drumlochar Road and up Tier Hill to see the view of Loch Patrick below and Lochmuckno away beyond, open out on a sunny autumn morning. I drive along past neighbours and relations, and when Corliss Fort comes into view in the distance, Big Mick and Big John Francis come to mind. Giants of men of my youth who remembered my name if they saw me, a toddler, in the car with Daddy. Around the sharp corner of Tierbush, down the hollow road, and Daddy's words would come seeping through. Always go around that bend as if you know there's another yuck coming. It's a wicked wee bend, and if there's anything coming at speed. On down with Podnas on the right, or Camp David as a legendary man christened it. There's something magical about that place. That's where we left Francis behind in the lane one day he was bold, and it's ironic to think that he now lives there. Podna would have come from Podrick, Mammy would say from her wealth of Irish language and lore, and memories would flood back to a very different time, to a man of legend, and then more recently to the party in Podnas and the old socks hanging from the ceiling to decorate the place. Erwin's weren't nearwise. And on that Easter Sunday night, some 30 years ago, after the disco was over, the young and old came from far and wide. Entrance via the round feeder. Make sure you avoid the donkel. To a night of crack and song and music provided by a few accordion players. Past Cohen's I go. I remember the teeny wee house in off the road. It was derelict then and is no more now. Who was Cohen, Daddy? He was James Cohen, James Duffy. He went to America years ago. I remember thinking of James Duffy living in a big wooden-fronted house along a tree-lined street with a beautifully manicured front garden, lighted up in glorious sunshine. Let's hope he found a life like that in America. I often wonder what he would have thought of the destruction that befell his little part of this road in the early 70s, where the scars of the British Army campaign to blow up the border are still to be seen, where after all of this time, parts of the hedges have never grown back. I also wonder, do people know who travel that road know that there are at least 2 old cars beneath them, dumped there to help fill in the craters as soon as possible, so that those like Podna and James Cohen would not be cut off from Barney Tarry. I remember that day. We went over to see what had happened, and Daddy got out of the car and scrambled over the mounds of strewn clay and stones that had been blasted out of the ancient tier ground and up through the field of Barney Tarry's Bray. And like Finn McCool, he picked up a huge boulder above his head to show Mammy, who was in the car below with 2 or 3 of us, the wee ones, and the size of the debris that had been thrown from where she sat. In such devastation and utter destruction of what had been green fields the day before, I remember feeling safe beside this big, strong man, my Daddy. As we sat in the car waiting on Daddy to look at the cattle, we kept an eye out for the gentleman, Benny Barney Tarry. There was something about Benny. He was a friendly man, a bachelor, who was very clean and tidy and wore a tie every day of the week. If he saw our car at the gate, he would always come dawdling down from the house, stick in hand and dog in tow. He'd shout in to us in the car, and then he would have a crack with Daddy. Benny very much kept himself to himself, and I remember the gasps at his wake when the neighbours came in to see his coffin draped with a tricolour. On I go on my way past Pete O'Neill's deserted farm. A man who told us when we were wee, I'll eat you and I'll chew you and I'll spit you back out. Somehow we were never afraid of this giant of a man who had huge bulging eyes when he told us of our fate, who wore a long dirty overcoat tied tight over a similarly bulging frame with binder twine. I used to think if he'd loosened the binder twine, his eyes mightn't bulge as much. I go past a familiar Drumgoose School, Tome football field, Brennan's Cross and Broomfield Crossroads, and on up the Carrick stretch. Now it has changed. There are so many more big lorries and fast cars, you need to be very careful. And even when it has been straightened so much from the crooked road to Carrick, there are crosses and memorials to those who have been killed on it, one a far-out relation of my own. All tended to with loving care, occasional fresh flowers laid to mark an anniversary or a birthday or Christmas. So many who have been lost to their families. Ganyana Gia Trokra or Hugalair. Every morning I journey through these places and people of 20 years ago, of 40 years ago, of ancient times. The hazy memories of youth, the stark, raw realities of war, the legends of folklore and the legends that I knew. All part of me and my life. And it's those 5 minutes on the Carrick stretch that transport me to the now, to the present, and to the work to be done. It's then I'll begin my day. South Armagh on an autumn day. There's nothing as nice as going for a walk on an autumn day down through the woods towards Creggan Lawns. When you're well wrapped up, you don't care about the biting wind or the mizzling rain. To hear the ancient trees creak in the breeze with their dying leaves swirling to the ground to join millions of others to create a rustling carpet beneath your feet. To catch a glimpse of a busy squirrel readying itself for the long slumber through the winter months. Or go down the road to Kiltyban Lake and see the reflection of the hills beyond in her calm mirror. To see the silent swans elegantly glide along on the water, or to be welcomed by the noisy ducks and their growing young, hoping you've taken bread with you so that they can enjoy a surprise feast. To hear the swish of the fishing line as the fishers make a cast in the hope of a catch. Or over at Teaghullen, to sit at Cuchullin's feet and look at the majestic, magical, mystical Slieve Gullion, where Finn McCool lost his youth to the hag on Cailleach Bera. It's there I take time to sit and think of that mysterious past, with the sound of the bubbling, swirling water in the background, and I'm taken back to the present by the sound of children playing among the boulders that form an ancient fairy ring. I turn to look at the fine monument erected to commemorate those young men who gave their lives for Irish freedom. How they would have liked to enjoy a windy, wet day strolling through the beautiful South Armagh.
Barnagrana. Underneath the dull, dark, threatening skies, the early morning winds gently coax the lush, emerald green grass into a gentle sway. Sparkling with reflective raindrops, the heavily water-laden blades part at the feet, that plod, plod, plod up the cascading hilly landscape. Each step rendered increasingly laborious by the gloopy, gluey consistency of the post-storm earth. His feathers ruffled and cajoled by the penetrating wind, the pint-sized figure moves slowly, his progress resembling an elderly farmer, walking in that unique, stunted fashion. Each footstep quite deliberate and exaggerated, hands clasped behind their back, whilst giving the impression of a top-heavy body, as they remain stooped, gently rocking their torso back and forth to aid their propulsion forward. Making his way up the rain-drenched slope, he stops dead in his tracks, startled by a noise. He takes on the appearance of a statue as he remains frozen, listening for the source of the rustling in the nearby hedgerow. A minute passes and he begins to relax, gradually lowering his body closer to the earth once more. He proceeds cautiously, his head bobbing rapidly from side to side, clocking his surroundings before he releases the remaining tension in his body. Satisfied, he accelerates his ascent to reach Barnagrana and take his leave home. With a final peek around the hedge, the pheasant paces forward, rapidly disappearing out of sight. The universality of grief lies not in the pangs of sadness, of upset, of instability and anxiousness that forcefully and bluntly manifest themselves following a bereavement, but instead resides in the sudden disappearance from the lives of family and friends, the small idiosyncrasies that were the building blocks of the person's character. You might be woken to the realization of the loss by the abrupt cessation of the nondescript tune that was hummed each day as they went about the housekeeping. Morning time brings different sounds now, as gone is the clinking of the teacups as they prepared tea for the house. The air no longer bursts with their scent as they readied themselves for the day. The chair in the living room is there as it always was, but it now remains empty. The handbag remains beside the chair, like a guard refusing to leave its post despite being stood down. The abundance of their belongings in each room and the continued arrival of post seems to taunt and haunt you for a time, suggesting to the grief-stricken mind that they are there, perhaps in the next room, watching one of their favourite television shows, as was their daily routine. Their physical presence was comforting to everyone around. The contrasting stillness is jarring. It is not controversial to espouse, through such examples, the concept of the uniqueness of the individual. Grief, therefore, cannot be a commonly shared experience. The peculiarity of their character alone will make separate each person that feels a loss. It may be true that there are similar physical reactions to the realization that someone important to you has died. There may be tears, an unwillingness to eat, the refusal of the body to sleep, despite the numerous frustrating hours spent awake, mulling over last interactions with the person who has passed. But each person's engagement with grief will be heavily dependent upon many factors. Such considerations consist of elements such as the bereaved's relationship with their dear departed soul, whether they had believed in life everlasting, or whether you did. Was the death sudden, or did it occur over an extended time frame? How old were they? How present were they in your life? For close family members, a period of reassessment of their identity can be called for. Who are they now that this person has left this earthly plane? They remain the daughter, son, mother, father, husband, wife, brother, sister, or simply a close friend in name. Reality, however, dictates that the associated daily duties of such roles become largely redundant. Grief brings out a seldom seen level of selfishness and ego in those left to mourn a departure. Some blame themselves as if somehow they were so powerful that an action or actions of theirs caused this person to die. Some take guilt in such a way that they almost redefine its meaning. The majority of people resort to envisioning the milestone moments in life that they will not now see and try to navigate these new seas without a full crew. Future achievements forever will be permeated by a melancholy. Of course, this affects the living more so than the souls who have passed on. So who do we mourn for? Are we mourning for the lost love? Or do we really mourn for the loss of our own lives as it existed before?
The keeper of all that is great. I thought she was a friend, but she was way more than that. What is it they say? You can pick your friends, but not your relations. Kindred spirits will often converge, finding their way together. We are an unlikely pair, she and I, a generation apart, with the same maiden name, but no relation. Our common denominators are Guinness, a yarn, songs, and our love of living on this mountain. Our paths first crossed when I was unaware of myself, newly married, eager to please the world and all who walked on her. I was guarded and keen to toe the expected lines. Over the years, she soon knocked that out of me. She taught me how to hold the head up, to shout louder, to believe, to be strong and protest. 2 fingers to the establishment, especially the Queen's men stomping permits on our freedom to roam. Self-appointed officials allotting passes to enter the floodlit solstice tomb. Our bond was cemented by a talk of my mother, long gone, memories of her in youth, before me. Unafraid to spark a tear by speaking her name and resurrecting her just when I needed to hear it. A reassurance conveyed that it was fine to be different, celebrating non-conformity. I learned weirdos were wonderful, welcomed even. Who wants to be like all the rest? We share stubbornness and pride in equal measurement, and a particular vein of defiance. Yet it's not a suffocating friendship, just an unspoken pact of trust and knowing. We have imbued the same eccentric creative energy from the soils and springs of this shared slope. We awake to the same sunrise and rest in the same dusks that fed the dreams of our ancestors. We walk our lonely hours in the footprints of those long gone before us, who toiled out their existence among the beauty of these same hills. We do this with an unbridled pride in our people and our place. We would not thrive away from here. It is so embedded in our hearts, in our soul. Over the years, she has passed on so many gifts of wisdom, grace, bravery, solace. She allowed me to be me, thorns and all. She has a strength unlike any other, an innate trust of instinct, a deep serenity and an understanding. She is my modern day Bridget, a Celtic nature warrior, deeply connected to the land. When the world got too much, she reminded me, we are born of granite, women of South Armagh, women of Gullion, and we will endure. I will be there to remind her of that when her time comes, when she needs resurrecting. It will be an honour. The gathering of flames. There was a definite chill in the air. Evenings were closing in. The tea would be a rush this evening, something quick, straight after homework to make it on time. Are we bringing the kids? Of course we are. This is important. Crucial. We need to be heard. The frustration of not having a voice in their future is becoming suffocating. The misconstrued conceptions of our communities, our dilemmas, our threatened normality being spouted across the water is mind-blowing. My heart is leaden, my shoulders weighted with the worry of the unknown, our future peace being cast to the whims of buffoonery and the nonchalance of the Tory scramble for power, of the little Englanders' pride in their flag, their blind indifference, their racism, their unacceptance. This cannot define us. This cannot dictate who we are and what we are. I won't have a red line drawn around me. I won't be corralled. Our children's inherited peace is a fragile gift. I do not want my son to flinch at the circular red light waving in the distance at a border patrol like I once did. I do not want his shackles to rise as they tear up the carpet of his boot in a stop and search. I want my children to have the freedom to roam freely along these beautiful roads in this place we love, this place we come from, where we belong. I want their identity to be a shared one, of their own choosing. I do not want it dictated to them. They told us to meet at the nearest border crossing to us. I checked on the dashboard over the last couple of days, and the closest was Benny the Go's old shop at the top of Tiffcrum. The front door of the shebeen, sometimes known as the Spike Hotel, was in the north, and the back door was in the south, leading to Monaskreib. Well, we need candles. It's not Lourdes we're going to, only Fard, he jeered, handing me the flashlight. Are we bringing a flask and sandwiches, Daddy? Inquired the wee one. You just ate your dinner. She was getting used to marches. We were to meet there at 8 o'clock, and we were a little early for once. Not many about. They're probably all at the Carrickdale. The news teams, politicians and foreign journalists would probably outnumber the locals there. There was a mixed bag here, though, already. Same old familiars, same Stuarts, but also new families, non-political, worried about the outcome of the border problem. They began to gather in groups, catching up with the neighbours. They often just drove past, never bothering to stop anymore. Their faces were alight from the glow of the fire lit in a big barrel right where the border roads met. There was an air of anticipation, a collective nostalgia mixed with an undertone of the dread of the serious nature of our predicament. 300 yards over the road, there was another gathering where the border met at the Captain's Road. I could see the odd spark rising from their fire barrel over the tops of the ditches. I wished I was a crow looking down on all these fires at the crossroads stretching over this land, over this unique place. I looked behind me as the crowd grew. It was almost time. Who would speak? Who would share their memories? Who would voice our concerns? A shinner stepped forward with a loudspeaker. After a few rousing lines, I tuned out. It's all well and good preaching to us, but where was our voice in Westminster where it would count? Where was our representation where it needed to be? The time for abstentionism has passed. We need to be heard now. But I stayed silent. I behaved. I conformed. And I bit my lip. This was not the place. A little 6-year-old hand in mine squeezed and shook me from my meanderings. Mammy, what's a hard border? Red lines. Borders. These lines between us. Who put them all there? When did they appear? Are they really there? Borders. You stay on your side. I'll stay on mine. We could meet in the middle. We should make the time. Borders. Is this what defines us? Is this how we are filed? One side safer, the other side wild. Borders. Let's tear them down. Together we may just find, when we stand proud and stand united, borders are only of the mind.
Nana on the bike. My grandmother cooked every meal from scratch and grew blackberries and gooseberries for her jams and tarts. Entering her small farmhouse enlivened our senses with a smell of freshly baked bread, cooling, wrapped in a tea towel. She pumped water from the well and carried it into the house in pails. The milk from the cow's udders sat in an earthenware jug on the scullery floor. She wrung the neck of a chicken in the outhouse every week and plucked it before cleaning it out. Never seen without her housecoat, she was always on the move. She didn't sit still. Her garden was our haven, with peony roses and mini beasts, our playthings. The deep windowsills held the geraniums, dry mostly. I wonder if she liked them. The drawer of the sewing machine stuffed with buttons and cotton reels. The pincushion hanging on the back of the door was in use daily. Her hands never stopped. Our hands were Lifebuoy soap before we tucked into the apple tarts, which was her staple dessert. We weren't spoiled, but we were indulged with sugar sandwiches. Meal times were a celebration of God's blessings. Prayer punctuated our day, the longest and most ardent being the last hour of the day, where we knelt and invoked the benedictions of every saint in heaven after the rosary had been said. Life was slow. Sitting in the quiet room, the only sound was that of the ticking clock and the smell of Grandpa's pipe tobacco. My cousin and I went on sleepovers. We frightened the life out of the chickens by taking the eggs from under them as they slept. We played in the ruins of the church next door, using the gravestones as play objects. Saint Menina watched from the mountain, and we'd run up to her well, mystified at the tokens of devotion which the frequent pilgrims left. The Penal Times picture was over our bed. We studied that scene so much, we became part of it. We played with the cuckoo clock, and we knew the names of the man and woman who presented promptly and regularly. The best china in the china cabinet I never saw used. The regular china for everyday use came out of the large dresser. She'd cycle through 3 townlands to visit us, and then her work would start. She'd whitewash the outside of the house, or wallpaper the inside of it. She cycled every Thursday down the hill to Murray's Corner and got the bus to Newry to buy what she couldn't grow and to get her hair done. If her long journey back up that steep hill to Clevie Old Church, walking her bike and carrying her heavy groceries equally distributed between the handlebars, left her weary, we didn't hear of it. I don't think I ever saw her cross. A happy, contented family woman, Ellen brought lightness and joy to all. Respect. It was early spring this year when I caught a glimpse of my great-grandmother, Lizzie Ann Campbell, née Barclay. I felt empathy for her across the generations, across the religious divide, across the social divide, the educational divide. Lizzie Ann. We married in Dublin on a lovely, bright autumn day in September 1903. We had our wedding breakfast in Geraldine House. Excitedly, we took the train to Adavoil. I hadn't known such rurality being a city girl. The people were nice enough, wary at first, but helpful when I struggled with the country ways. All that carrying of water. I yearned for Dublin. I missed my friends. Out in the fields all day, Hugh wasn't in much form for conversation in the evenings. He didn't understand my need for companionship. He thought that I should be content with his mother. We lived with Mrs. Campbell. The cold I got used to, the dark I never did. And then I became a mother. Hugh insisted the child be called after his mother. It was the only time I saw Mrs. Campbell smile. Sarah was 2 when Lizzie arrived. Hugh, disappointed again that it wasn't a boy, gave no heed to the name, so I named her after me. My 3rd girl, Ellen, brought with her the despair that we would never have a boy. Being brethren, we prayed hard and we were good Christians, but God knew what was in our hearts, and He punished us for not wanting the girls badly enough. Ellen was the first to die. Always a weak child, she had been ill for less than a month when she succumbed to enteritis before she turned 2. The girls were born into poverty, and I couldn't bear not being able to afford a doctor. I had known a better life, and I wanted it for my children. So I taught Sarah how to read and write, and I sent her to Dublin to my sister. I missed her so much, but I wanted her to have a break from our harsh land and unpolished ways. As I did the chores and worked the land, I felt I was releasing her from her duties. I thought of her often. Then the telegram came. 7 words that killed my soul. Sarah, stop. Dead. Stop. Will, stop. Send, stop. To, stop. Adavoil. TB of the ankle. TB meningitis. Must have been so sore. My darling daughter, my firstborn, my hope. I broke. Mrs. Campbell ashamed of the association of TB, sternly told us to tell others that she died of lockjaw. When we carried her wee body from Adavoyle station to the house, me and the local women, I thought I too would die. Lizzie, only 14, disappeared shortly after this, and we never saw her again. At this time, the first of my sons turned 8. Samuel was his father's pride and joy, and the apple of his grandmother's eye. With the girls gone, we became more fearful of Mrs. Campbell. Her mood swings and forgetfulness were worrying. Hugh was full of concern because of her relationship with the boys. We had a second, Robert, by then. Hugh loved the boys and was happy and contented. We didn't know that Hugh had only 5 summers left. Although not seemingly connected with the world on a day-to-day basis, Hugh's death in 1925, whilst I was in confinement with my 6th pregnancy, broke Mrs. Campbell's heart. She didn't last 9 months after him. As I nursed her, I witnessed how she lost her harsh view of the world. Lightness got into her soul. She got to live to 87. I wouldn't be so lucky. I lived for only 53 years. The first 23 in Dublin, the 30 in Adavoyle were tough years. I lost my 3 girls, but I had my 3 boys, Samuel, Robert and George. George, who was born after his father's death. Hugh had the sons he so longed for, that Mrs. Campbell had resented me for not producing sooner. But they were gone.